Welcome to The Listening Place, where we listen to life from the inside out. I'm your host, Nancy Rosanoff. Today's guest is Joie Davidow. Joie wrote her autobiography entitled it Marked for Life. It begins, "If I had been born in another time, in another place, I might have been left out in the snow to die. A girl baby my parents couldn't afford to feed. A girl baby with a face so disfigured, she'd never find a husband." After her childhood marked with a large facial birthmark, Joie went on with her life to become a lifestyle commentator, editor, and author. She founded LA Style, the fastest growing regional magazine in the U.S., and won numerous awards. Joie has appeared on Oprah, CBS, This Morning, CNN, and now she's on The Listening Place. Joie, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's great to be here.
So what an amazing beginning to your life. And then you went right into being so interested in fashion and makeup and design. How did that happen?
When I was a little girl, there was nothing that could be done for the birthmark that covered almost half of my face. It was like this. And when the doctor was supposed to bring the baby in to show my mother, he didn't show up. He came in without the baby and he sat on her bed and he said, "Look, I have to tell you something." And my mother had never wanted to have children at all. So then to be faced with this child that wasn't right and was going to be an extra burden for her must have been very difficult.
Was she young?
She wasn't that she was so young, it was that she was an attorney. And she was an ambitious woman and had never thought of having children. So I was really a terrible accident. But she took me to every doctor to try to figure out what could be done, and at that time there was really nothing. The cures were worse than the problem. They were going to do skin grafting, or they planted radioactive materials below the skin. They tried to freeze it off, and they really didn't even know exactly what it was, but it was a dark purple stain, which is called a port wine stain. And as I grew older, and I got tormented by the other kids, and also just looking in the mirror, you know, I would say, well, why does it have to be on my face? If you're going to have a big birthmark, couldn't it be someplace where nobody could see it? It was very hard for me, and so I had to find ways to escape. And the two ways that I escaped were by reading and then by singing, by music and words. My father collected books, just absolutely compulsively. He collected books he didn't read. He just bought books. He went to every old bookstore he could find wherever we went, and he bought books. He had multiple sets of Dickens and Austen and all of those great authors because he came from Eastern Europe, from Russia and Ukraine, and in those countries, because we were Jewish, his family wasn't allowed to send their kids to the universities and the schools, and I think that coming here, they held education in such a high regard that if they had money for food or books, they would buy books. And I was a little girl, if I was bad and cried, my mother would send me or my sisters up into the attic as a punishment, and we had to stay there till we calmed down. But the attic is where my father kept all those books. So Mommy would yell, "Okay, you can come down now, it's time for dinner," and I would say, "I'm busy."
You're still there.
I was still there, and I just would pick a book because I liked the cover or it had woodcuts in it, but I ended up reading books that I wasn't ready to read, but I still got so carried away with it, because when I read the book, if I was reading Jane Austen or if I was reading Balzac, I was in England or I was in France, and I wasn't this little girl in a little tiny town with a terrible mark on her face. I could escape. And so that's how I actually became a writer.
You know, I want to go back to something you said at the beginning, then we'll go on with your career, about how your mother really didn't want you, and you were her firstborn, and she was a busy career woman.
That's right.
So how did your becoming part of her life change her?
Well, my grandmother had said to her, "Don't worry, I'll take care of the baby. You can go back to work." Because my mother wanted to get rid of me. And in those days it wasn't legal. It was very difficult. I think she tried. But she didn't succeed in getting rid of me. So my grandmother came to see my mother after I was born, and she was feeling so sorry for my poor mother, because now she was saddled not only with this baby, but with this baby that was badly marked. And there was my mother, happy as a clam, playing with me. So although I think my mother didn't fall in love with me at first sight, as she often said she did, I think she eventually got into it, you know, and she thought, okay, if this is what I'm going to do now, and this is what my life is going to be, I'm going to do it as best I can. And she just wrote poems for us, and she wrote songs for us, and she made clothes for us, and she tried very hard. She was that kind of a person.
And so you and your mom worked out a wonderful relationship, or
well, when I was little,
it was,
and then she had my sister Jackie within 2 years, because she thought she would have the 2 kids and get it over with, and she knew in those days they thought an only child was not going to work out, would be an unhappy person. So she had the 2 of us, and then when Jackie was born, she took that baby apart. They bring it up in a little blanket all wrapped up, and she took that blanket off and looked all over to make sure that there was nothing wrong, you know. And my sister had a little birthmark under her hair, which most people have, like, something. So to help me when I went to school, when I came back and I said, the kids are driving me crazy, what's wrong with me? She said, well, you know, when a baby is born, she's assigned a guardian, or he is assigned a guardian angel. And the guardian angel comes down to take a look at their new charge. And if the guardian angel is just amazed by the beauty of this new baby, it will kiss the baby and leave a little mark. But when your guardian angel saw you, she was so overwhelmed with how beautiful you are that she lost control and touched you. And that is her mark of her hand on your face.
What a wonderful story.
So I believed this, you know. Of course, the kids in school didn't believe it, but they say, what's that on your face? And I would say, oh, well, you know, that's where my guardian angel touched me. So then when my sister was born and she heard that story, she, well, where's mine?
Where's my kiss?
So we had to fan it under her hair for her.
So each child needs their own little story to help them find out who they really are.
Well, it was to make it tolerable for me, to help me, you know, and it was very sweet that she did that.
So then what happened in your teenage years, and where did you go, and how did you then get involved with fashion?
Well, my teenage years were, of course, really tough, because any adolescent girl thinks she looks terrible. I mean, the most flawless ones will say, I can't wear this, and I know what my stomach poops out or something. And I really had something seriously wrong. And in a little town where there's not a lot of tolerance and there aren't very many artistic people, I mean, it was really impossible for me to date or have that kind of a life. But by the time I got into college, I realized that I could overcompensate, in fact. And so when all the other girls showed up for college in their jeans and sneakers and ponytails, I showed up dressed like I was going to argue a case in court. I had on a silk dress and high-heeled shoes, and I had my hair up, and I still didn't have makeup on, because the only makeup that would really cover this was a real therapeutic makeup. It was called Cover Mark, and at that time it was very thick and heavy, and I tried it once.
Even theater makeup?
Well, I'll get to that in a minute. No, there wasn't, but you could get this Cover Mark stuff. They sold it in doctors' offices, and when I was very little, I was very interested in Brenda Starr comic strips. I absolutely worshiped Brenda Starr, girl reporter, and I wanted to be Brenda Starr. And I used to wait for my father to bring the paper home so I could get to the next installment, and she always had some exotic trip. And one day he brought back the paper, and there was a story of how Brenda Starr had found a little girl. She had heard about a little girl who never left her house, and she had to be schooled at home because she had a big mark on her face. And there was a picture of this girl who looked like me. And I was horrified, because I thought, well, the other kids are going to read this, and when I go to school, they're going to say, ha ha, you're like that freaky kid in the comics. And as the days went on, Brenda Starr brings this little girl Cover Mark makeup, and the girl puts it on her face, and it covers up the birthmark, and she can go out. That was the actual Brenda Starr strip. And it took about a week. And so when I saw that, I said to my mother, well, I want this makeup. And she,
so Brenda Starr was promoting the makeup in her comic strip?
I don't know why this. And she told the story of Lydia O'Leary, who developed Cover Mark makeup, who had a birthmark herself, and she was a chemist and unable to find work because no one wanted her in the front office. And so as a chemist, she was painting something one day and realized she could cover a darker color with a lighter color. And then she came up with this and got a patent for it, and it's a big story. So my mother took me upstairs, and in the back of one of her drawers, she had this Cover Mark kit that she had bought when I was born, or very little. And we played with it. We put it on, and it was horrible. I mean, for a little face to have that heavy and the white powder. Yeah. And I thought, I was so distressed, because I thought, this is my future. And I don't know how old I was, 6 or 7. And I'm either going to be a freaky lady with a big purple mark, or a really freaky lady who looks like she's wearing a white mask. Anyway, but finally, then I had to go to college, and it was hard enough in my little town where people knew me, and didn't, unless I saw a stranger. When I went to high school, I started to see strangers. they didn't notice the birthmark or they wouldn't remark on it because they had seen it. But when I went to college, I was at the University of Pennsylvania, and there were people, thousands of people who had never seen me before. And, you know, people did double takes. I had a reputation, the girl with the mark. And I couldn't stand it. I went for the summer I was by that time studying to be an opera singer, and I went for the summer to the Aspen Music Festival, and there were more people, and I was always getting looked at. And there were days when I just wanted to go into my room and close the door and not come out. I couldn't go out there again. You just suddenly became aware of those eyes that went, you know, and they wouldn't say anything, or if they did, you know, it made you feel terrible. But you knew you weren't right. And so I was desperately looking. I used to study fashion magazines like the Bible because I had to be perfect in every other way. You know, some women who are really obese always have flawless nails and makeup and hair, and even if they can't wear the most beautiful dress, they have the most gorgeous shoes, and that's what I did. I really worked hard.
So you learned how to dress.
I worked hard to look as good as I could, and it helped that my mother was interested in fashion and my grandmother made things, and so I was encouraged in that way. So I was studying like the August issues of those magazines, like the back to school issues that are this thick, and I was like reading them for hours. And I was looking to find an ad that would say flawless coverage. Those were the two magic words. And that year, Max Factor, for the first time, made the makeup that he had developed for TV and film, stage, pancake makeup and stuff like that, available like in the drugstore. So when I got home, I went down to the drugstore and got this makeup. And of course, the irony was that then pancake makeup became like a cliche. Oh, she looks like she's wearing a ton of pancake makeup. It was a bad thing. But I couldn't even wear pancake makeup because it wasn't thick enough to cover my birthmark. I had to wear this sort of creamy thick stick. It was called pan stick. And I practiced and practiced until it was really flawless. You could not see my birthmark. But I looked like I was wearing a lot of makeup. But I became very addicted to it because when I went back to school that year with all the makeup on and I started to meet new people, there was a new conductor in the music department, and they looked at me and they shook my hand for the first time. They were very relaxed and they didn't do this and they didn't feel a little uncomfortable about and it was such a different reaction to me, not anything that I had experienced before, that I realized I couldn't take the makeup off. No one could catch me. I mean, it was now a big secret, and it became its own sort of burden because anything could destroy the makeup. A windy day makes your eyes run, and then there's tears dripping down your face, and so you've got this black mascara and then red streaks where the makeup's going. If you perspired, and you're wearing all of that creamy makeup plus a lot of powder on top, it would turn into like water and flour, and you get these dough balls practically rubbing down your face. To try to put makeup on a warm day, like even this morning, if you're perspiring and your face keeps getting wet and you keep trying to put the makeup on, it's terrible. Or if you have a boyfriend and you want to give him a hug and he pulls away and there's his jacket.
So you lived a life really totally involved with how you looked and how people perceived you.
Yes.
And at the same time, you had this inner life going on, right? I mean, one would think that one of the compensations that you did was you also developed your inner self in a way. You developed your powers of observation and of being present to other people. And that's one of the reasons you could become a great writer.
Well, if you're always on the outside looking in, then journalism is the perfect career for you. If you're the kid who stands in the shadows while the other girls are jumping rope, all you can do is watch, observe, and take notes. And so, as a journalist, I was standing on the outside of life taking notes.
So was there ever a point where, so you lived so much of your life wanting to be on the inside, but always feeling on the outside?
I finally think I stopped wanting to be on the inside. I thought it was impossible. It just wasn't going to be me.
You finally let it go. When, and what was that moment? Do you remember anything about that?
Well, eventually, as you get older, your birthmarks actually progresses. It's not just a big purple stain anymore. It starts to get raised and pebbly because what it really is malfunctioning or missing nerves. And those nerves control the dilation of the blood vessels. So they're always totally dilated. And eventually the blood vessels start to break down and the skin gets pebbled and it gets bumpy and it gets raised and it can get quite horrible. And then the birthmark, instead of looking like a port wine stain, the color of port wine, which is what it's called,
which is a beautiful phrase, port wine.
Well, I liked strawberry better. Yeah. Strawberry birthmark, but of course I didn't have one. I had a port wine stain. It really starts to look like eggplant. It's very dark. And so when I got to be older and that progression started happening, and no one had prepared me for that. I had no idea what was going on. And so I started getting bumps on my skin that if I just went like that, they would bleed and bleed and bleed. And I went to the doctor and I said, do you think it has anything to do with the birthmark? And he didn't even know, you know. Oh, no, it's just a popped blood vessel. So he would cauterize it. And I said, isn't there anything we can do now to take this off? There was no hope for me when I was younger. Certainly something must have been invented. And he said, well, I know a guy in Pasadena who's doing an FDA test with the ruby laser. And I went there. And the man said to me, oh, I can take this off. And it was the most dramatic moment of my life because I was really hysterical with joy on the one hand. And on the other hand, I thought, what if you don't have that birthmark anymore and you're just not special?
Right.
And that was like, uh-oh, we better think about this, you know. Well, of course, he couldn't really take it off. And I had 3 horrible, horrible, painful treatments. And
did he lighten it up at all?
It lightened it up. Mm-hmm. But when I came in for the 3rd treatment, he said, you know, the FDA is going to take my laser away. And this might be your last chance to ever have any help with this. Should we just blast it? And I said, oh, yeah, blast it. And so he blasted it, and it really scarred my face badly. In the book, I say that it looked like a glacier crossed the the plains and left the Grand Canyon in its wake. There were big indents in my skin. So
was it around then that you kind of let go and says, well, this is who I am?
No, I didn't.
You kept going.
I kept going. I kept wearing the makeup, and even when I would have treatments and they'd say, well, you can't wear makeup for so many days because to touch your skin felt like you're touching with broken glass, I forced myself to get that makeup on so I could go out. No, I think that the thing that made it possible for me to accept myself finally was to finally see somebody else who looked like me. And I'd only ever seen one other person with a birthmark. And it was when I was a very tiny girl, and I was on my way to my grandmother's house with my mother and my sister, and we were on a subway in Philadelphia. And a man got on the train who was an older man, and he had an advanced port wine stain, because they do advance, and it covered his whole face and down his neck like this. And everybody on the train looked away. And I was so afraid that the people on the train would see me and see him and go, ooh, that I put my face down on my mother's lap and just prayed that my sister didn't say anything, because little kids will say, hey, look, he looks like Joey. And that was my impression of what a person with a birthmark was, like a complete lost soul, crumpled clothes, you know, lonely, no one will look at you.
Completely rejected.
Completely rejected, and I thought, that can't be me. I'm a nice little girl in a pretty little dress, and that can't be my future. It can't be, but I kept thinking about him. One night I was watching television, and there was nothing on, and I saw one of those magazine shows, and it told a story about a woman who had a rare disease in which she compulsively pulled out her hair, and so she was bald, and she had to wear a wig. And when she was asleep, she would still pull whatever was left. So I thought, well, she has a secret. She wears a wig, and no one knows that she's bald, and I have a secret, and I wear them. And she had discovered a website with other people who had this, and that was her support group. So I thought, if they have a website for something like that, there must be somebody who made a website for birthmarks. So I got on the commercial, and I typed in birthmark, and I typed in port wine stain, and I found it. And I found a website called www.birthmarks.com. And it was a news group. And to get onto the news group and into the archives where people told their stories, you had to join. And I never joined anything. I was definitely on the outside. I lived in a town where we were one of the few Jewish families. I was out. I had a birthmark. I was out. I was an opera singer and a reader of, literature in a little tiny factory town. I was out. And so I never could stand the thought of joining. I didn't belong anywhere. But I joined that just because I wanted to read the archives, and because I could do it anonymously. It was just me typing. I didn't have to meet anybody. I didn't have to talk to anybody. I didn't have to answer an email. I could just read everybody else. And I got onto the archives, and I started to read the stories. And it was my story. And all those feelings that I had repressed or rejected all my life, and then my parents had encouraged me to ignore. If I'd say, oh, the kids are teasing me, it's horrible, why do I have this on my face? They say, oh, be quiet, it's no big deal. Somebody else has freckles, which was really simply not true.
It wasn't the same kind of thing at all.
No. Oh, I have a big nose, so what? Well, you can get your nose fixed. But so what? People don't say, what's wrong with your nose?
Right, so people try to ignore it, or they think that what would be helpful is for us to pretend that it doesn't exist.
To just deny all
deny it
And so
all.
I felt that I didn't, those feelings that I had were bad. they were wrong, they were
because you're so
self-pitying,
affected, yes.
and I was not allowed to feel those things, so I must not really feel them.
Or I must be bad because of it.
Or it must be bad because I felt it, or I have to get over it.
So who have you written this book for? What's the audience you had in mind when you wrote this book?
I wasn't writing it for people with birthmarks. I was writing it for everybody, because what I realized through getting to know other people who look like me, and through somehow finally accepting, okay, this is just you, get over it, that everybody does have something that they're hiding. There's always that secret burden that we carry, and because it's a secret, it's shameful. And it could be nothing about the way you look. It could be that you have a big credit card debt. But there's something everybody has that they wish the world wouldn't find out. I mean, you could have cellulite on your arms. But it's something you did, or it's something you grew up with, or something about your appearance, or many things. But there are those things that are your secret burden of shame. And the liberation you can have if you just say it. You know, I mean, I wouldn't tell my best friend that I had a birthmark on my face. I drove to those doctor's appointments myself because nobody could know, and here I am talking about it on television.
On television, but how do you get through that moment? You know, so you say, okay, just say it. But I think what people fear with that is that, okay, if I let people know that I care about, that I have this thing, what if they never want to be with me again?
Well,
that's the fear, right?
That's the fear.
That's the fear. What if they reject me because of this? Because some people will and some people won't. Some people will be uncomfortable and some people won't. So what did it take for you to kind of walk through that fear?
Because eventually you get so comfortable with your own self and so interested in everything else in the world that you're looking out instead of looking in the mirror. And so the mirror is not so interesting to you anymore. You're much more interested in the window. Because how long can you be interested in your own face?
Right.
I mean, that's boring. You know, how many years are you going to keep looking at the same face and going, wait, I think I see something over here? You know, and especially where I live in Los Angeles, you know, one little thing and called the Botox. And it's just boring. And I got so interested in everything else in the world that I didn't care. And if you don't like me because I have a birthmark, somebody else does.
Right, and that's really their problem. So you almost switch your focus to, I wonder how these people are going to respond to who I am.
Right.
Rather than, what do I have to do to make myself acceptable to them?
Right. I mean, I don't really care how they this morning I had to walk my friend's dog, and I wasn't going to put on my makeup, go walk the dog, come back, take a shower, and put on my makeup again. So I just went out.
Yeah.
Nothing happened.
Yeah. So you still have the mark. I mean, you can't even see it.
Well, I'm wearing makeup.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm wearing makeup. But I
so you never found surgery or laser or anything?
I had almost 30 treatments. And if people think that the laser will take it off, it won't. It does help. And it's a progressive problem because they can't really repair the nerve. All they can do is, with the lasers, remove some of the blood vessels. But they don't have any way to measure where those vessels are. So it's hit and miss. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes they don't have a laser that will go deep enough without damaging the skin.
Now, are you continuing to pursue other treatments? Or are you kind of accepted or just let go?
Well, you know, sometimes you just don't care enough to put yourself through it. But if it gets worse, then you try something else.
Right, or if you hear about something new, you'll explore it.
Right, right.
So it's part of your life.
It's part of my life, and luckily they were able to arrest the progress, and the birthmark is now light enough that it's very easy to cover. But it's still there.
Yeah, it's still there. It's still part of what defines your life in a way.
Right.
It doesn't define who you are.
No, and it's not the only thing I see when I look in the mirror anymore either.
No.
Yeah.
And so how long did it take for that to happen?
Oh, half a lifetime. Yeah.
And what do you recommend for people who are struggling with this same kind of issue?
To get interested in everything else and stop being so worried about your own self. Through the website, I've got to meet a lot of people who have birthmarks like mine, and we can talk and share, and that's very healing. And the most healing thing for me is to have the privilege of being able to help younger women who are going through this, to be able to write online to a little girl in South Africa who's going to go to middle school where she won't know anybody and will have a birthmark, you know, and say, well, look, this happened to me, this is what I did, it's going to be okay. Or a young girl who's going to college and she has to share her dorm room with somebody else, and what will I do when I take off my makeup? And you have to say, look, she may ask you a question, but she won't make fun of you. And that's the healing thing, because then all of the terrible things that you went through or the painful things that you went through are for some good purpose.
Right.
They aren't just some burden. It's now you can use it to help somebody else.
How do you hold that now? I mean, what happened to you? Was it a mistake? Is it part of who you are? Is it part of your soul's purpose in life? I mean, how do you hold what happened to you now in terms of the larger scheme of who you are?
Well, I just think you use whatever you got. And I was eventually able to use this. But I mean, if I wanted to think about it, I'd say, well, first you wrote this, and then you wrote that, and that prepared you to be able to write this, and it prepared you to be able to get this book published because you'd done something else. So, you just use what you've got in life. And this was something I thought that I could share for the benefit of others. So it made it easier for me to write it and not just, oh, my big ego, I'm writing about my own little self, right?
Right, it's you're making it some information for other people.
Right, you'll see yourself in my experience. And that's been the best part about writing the book, not just that people with birthmarks tell me, oh, I stayed up all night and I cried and I blah, blah, blah. But somebody said, oh, I felt just like you because I was the only kid in my school whose parents were divorced. And I felt like a pariah, or the kids called me fatso, or the kids called me nigger. All my life I've held this feelings. And so when I read your book, I saw myself, and that makes me think it was worth going through what I went through to write the book.
Well, Joie, on that note, our time is up. Our show's over. Well, thank you so much for writing the book.
Thank you for having me.
For living your life so courageously, and for sharing your story with us.
It's been a great pleasure.
Great. This is Nancy Rosanoff saying bye for now.